What would you do if your HOA called the cops on your grapevines, on your family's land, and tried to fine you for pruning at sunrise? Imagine paying thousands in dues just to be told you can't fix a fence your granddad built. Yeah, wild. And it gets worse. Name's Mark Weston. 3 years back, I walked away from a corner office in San Francisco, and the kind of suits that make dry cleaners rich. Divorce blew up my life, emptied my accounts, and shoved me toward the one thing that never betrayed me. My grandfather's old vineyard, tucked in Solstice Valley. Morning mist on grape leaves felt like therapy with birdsong. Floorboards in that farmhouse groaned like arthritic knees. And Barrel, my big goofy German shepherd, treated every delivery truck like it owed him money. I swapped conference calls for sunrise pruning. The irrigation was older than disco. The tractors rattled like tin cans. But the soil, man. The soil held memories. Granddad planted here back in 1962. Back when folks waved at tractors instead of writing them up on Facebook. He left me more than rows of vines. He left me a promise. Keep the land working. Keep the family name clean. Enter the HOA. Enter Karen. Karen Hartwell, President of Solstice Heights Homeowners Association. Queen of beige. Perfect hair, shellacked against the wind. Driving a white SUV that's never seen dirt. She's married to Preston Hartwell, a real estate developer with a smile that says trust me, and eyes that say don't. Karen's the type who says community standards like it's scripture. First skirmish. A fence. Just a fence. Deer had been treating my vineyard like an all-you-can-eat buffet. And drunk wedding guests sometimes wandered off the gravel path. So I set posts along the property line, standard agricultural fencing. The kind you see on half the farms west of the Mississippi. Karen marched up in heels that hated gravel and announced, clipboard raised like a badge. This fencing violates our aesthetic guidelines. I leaned on my post-hole digger. Ma'am, this farm's older than your cul-de-sac. Your rules don't apply to acreage you don't own. She smiled the way a cat smiles at a goldfish bowl. Rules are rules. Mark, this is a residential neighborhood now. We have standards. 2 days later. Certified letter. Cease and desist. Threats of daily fines. Copies to the county. My bank. And because of course, the local paper. It wasn't a note. It was a grenade with letterhead. I poured coffee. Spread the paperwork on my creaky kitchen table. And felt something old wake up. The part of me that used to bill by the hour for real estate wars. See, I didn't just quit law. For 15 years I lived in it. I knew how these games worked. And Karen, she'd just made her first big mistake. Agricultural properties like mine carry protections most folks never hear about. Especially when they predate HOAs. Granddad's deed. The one that smelled like dust in history. Held language about perpetual farming rights. In English, you don't get to aesthetic a farm out of existence because your lawn is nervous. Still, the county sent an inspector. Rodriguez showed up, apologetic. Boots muddy. Clipboard ready. Anonymous tip. He said. Which smelled exactly like Karen's perfume. He checked the barn from 1965. The equipment shed from the late 90s. The root cellar, older than my patience. Everything compliant. Everything legit. Your agricultural exemption is ironclad. He said. Whoever filed this doesn't know rural law. I did. And I knew something else. Now this wasn't about fence lines. This was war. The HOA called an emergency meeting. Agenda Community Beautification Standards. Subtext me. The community center smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and worry. About 3 dozen neighbors showed up, some farmers who still remembered when tractors had the right of way. Some folks fresh from open houses who believed property value was a religion. Karen took the front table like a talk show host. Slides about neighborhood character. Charts about harmonious aesthetics. Buzzwords stacked on buzzwords. Then she dropped a petition about property value concerns caused by commercial agriculture. The way she said commercial, you'd think I was storing dynamite under my vines. When they opened the floor, Mrs. Patterson, a retired teacher with a spine made of rebar, stood up. Mark's Vineyard is why we moved here. It's not a problem. It's the point. For the first time, Karen's smile cracked. She tabled the discussion pending legal review. Then whispered with a briefcase guy who looked like he billed in 6-minute increments. When she noticed me watching, they clammed up. Classic. Look, I ain't naive. Developers don't buy land because they love sunsets. They buy it to flip. That night I dug into records. Turns out, Preston had been quietly buying up parcels like a man building a monopoly board. 3 neighborhoods built. 2 more, pending. And feelers out on farm acreage. The math was simple. Agricultural dirt might fetch $8,000 an acre rezone. It residential. And suddenly, you're talking $50,000. My 40 acres were a lottery ticket if they could pry it from my hands. So Karen did what petty tyrants do when the law is not their friend. She went for the smear. A Facebook group popped up. Concerned neighbors of Solstice Valley. Pictures of my tractor at angles that made it look like a rust monster. Captions about delivery trucks speeding. Rumors about flies. Noise. Smells anything that could spook new homeowners. Hardware store Bill, who used to chat with me about the weather, suddenly stared at his shoes when I walked in. Even my bank started asking for additional documentation on routine equipment financing. I've seen that move before. You don't win in court, you starve the target. Make his life small. Make his friends forget him. I called my old law buddy, Jake Morrison, gravel voice. Environmental law crusader. He listened, then chuckled. Brother. They poked a sleeping bear. Barrel thumped his tail like he agreed. Surveyor time. Title search time. I should have done it earlier. But anger has a way of sharpening priorities. A week later, my surveyor spread maps on my kitchen table, while the smell of coffee and dust filled the room. You're gonna love this, he said. Turns out, my property line ran 50 feet farther east, straight through the back edges of 3 HOA backyards. Granddad had granted construction easements back in the day, but never sold the dirt. Classic farmer move loan space. Keep land. Better yet, we uncovered a utility easement from decades ago, legal access paths that snake through the valley for water and power. You don't block those. Not with a gate. Not with an attitude. I laughed so hard. Barrow barked at me like I'd lost it. Meanwhile, Karen hosted a community safety night. Her flyers warned about drunk drivers attracted by events, fire hazards from agricultural activity, and public health risks. The signatures on her petition, half looked like they came from the same hand with the same bad pen. You know when a story's slipping because the storyteller starts yelling. Karen was yelling. Then came the shiny envelope, a cease and desist from Hartwell. Morrison and Associates. No relation to my Jake. Expensive paper. Angry fonts. They threatened to sue for being a public nuisance. Rattled off a dozen municipal codes they claimed I was breaking, and gave me 72 hours to shut down all commercial activity. Here's the truth. Those letters work most of the time. They work on people who don't know their rights or don't have cash for a long fight. And, I didn't have cash. Divorce plus tractors equals a very creative budget. But I had something scarier than money history. And I had time. I drove to the courthouse with a thermos of coffee strong enough to clean engine parts. Down in the basement, where records go to nap, I sifted through dusty drawers by flashlight. Hours later, I found a misfiled folder that changed everything. 1987, the state had designated Solstice Valley a historic agricultural district. That label wasn't feel-good fluff. It carried teeth. Any development within 2 miles of heritage vineyards required environmental impact studies and state sign-off. Preston hadn't filed a single one. Not one. "Jake," I said, calling from my truck in the courthouse parking lot. "You're gonna want to sit down." I laid out the designation, the missing studies, the fraud potential. He whistled. "Mark, that's not just a civil slap. That's a federal faceplant. Wire fraud, mail fraud, maybe racketeering if there's a pattern." We started building a team. Jake took point on the legal strategy. Dr. Sarah Bennett, a soil scientist from the state university, joined to tackle the environmental side. She walked my rows with a field kit and the patience of a saint. "What they graded up there," she said, pointing toward the suburb, "is a textbook for how to ruin a watershed." Then there was Father Miguel Santos, a priest who moonlit as a community organizer, fighting displacement in the valley. He knew every farm family, every foreman, every story. "Brother," he told me, hands wrapped around a mug in my kitchen, "you are not alone. Corner an animal. It bites." Karen's people started cutting deeper. One morning, I found the main irrigation line sliced clean. Thousands of gallons wasted. Anonymous callers rang my wedding clients, muttering about chemical contamination. Bookings vanished. Fake reviews bloomed online like mold, claiming food poisoning and fistfights at receptions. Barrel, bless him, now barked at white SUVs as if they came with their own soundtrack. Jake moved in court. Quick. He secured a temporary restraining order prohibiting HOA officers or agents from interfering with agricultural operations pending a hearing. 18 pages of judicial, knock it off. Dr. Bennett's report, meanwhile, read like an indictment carved in stone. Improper grading, contamination risk, damaged wildlife corridors, stuff you can't hand-wave away with a smile and a cardigan. Then 3 HOA board members resigned. Quietly. Ethics, they said. Conscience, they hinted. The crack widened. Public records painted the real picture. Preston was leveraged to his eyeballs. Construction loans hung over his head like storm clouds. He needed new permits to keep cash flowing and crews working. Without them, foreclosure, bankruptcy. The whole beige dream turned to dust. Karen doubled down online, 20 posts a day. Conspiracy-level rants. I mean, there's people who can't stop typing. She accused me of everything short of stealing the moon. Meanwhile, Preston tried a different angle. He drove up one foggy morning with a briefcase and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. $4 million cash, he said. 48 hours to close. We can end this. Preston, I said. I wouldn't sell you this dirt for 10 and a first-round draft pick. He leaned in. You don't know who you're messing with. Farm boy. What he didn't know, I was wired. Courtesy of a friend whose badge carried federal weight. Every threat and hint rolled onto a tidy recording. Jake proposed mediation at the town hall. Let's be reasonable, we said. Let's talk. What we arranged was sunlight. Local news showed up. The state attorney general's office sent observers. Farmers packed the seats. You could taste the nerves, coffee, sweat, the distinct scent of carpet glue. Karen went first, grandstanding about community harmony. Preston followed with a generous settlement speech. I stood, thanked everyone for their patience, and began a walk through history. The 1987 heritage designation, the missing environmental studies, the survey lines through 3 backyards, the utility easements, then the documents, the emails, the permits never filed, the payments that flowed where they shouldn't. And one more thing, I said, glancing toward the back. Some folks here tonight have questions for Mr. Hartwell. Badges flashed. Federal agents walked in. The room went quiet, except for the click of handcuffs and the pop of camera flashes. Karen shouted that it was a setup. I mean, sorry, she howled. But the show was over. 6 months later, a judge described Preston's conduct as a systematic exploitation of agricultural families that represents the worst of modern greed. He got years, not months. Karen earned time in a minimum security facility and, more importantly, a permanent demotion from queen to cautionary tale. The white SUV disappeared. So did the HOA, dissolved by homeowners who realized their board had been weaponized against their own community. Solstice Valley won formal. Loctite heritage protections. Bulldozers tore down unpermitted McMansions and turned the scarred hills into restored habitat. Watching those walls fall felt, like exhaling for the first time in years. The vineyard, it flourished. Media told the story. Tourists came to taste what survival feels like in a glass. Justice Valley wine, yeah. The label name, stuck, sold out, harvest after harvest. Weddings booked out years in advance. Beryl got a partner. A rescue named Justice, who can sniff trouble at a county's distance. Kids came to the new community garden and learned that tomatoes don't grow on aisle 7. And Sarah, Dr. Bennett, she stayed. Moved into the farmhouse with soil samples and a smile that leveled me more than any court victory. Turns out, healing feels a lot like laughing on a porch while the sun falls into a field you saved. There's a reason folks get steamrolled. Most of us think rules are for fairness. And HOAs sell that story with glossy flyers. But sometimes, rules are tools. And tools in the wrong hands become weapons. The playbook goes like this. Isolate the target. Bury them in paperwork. Starve them of credit. Shame them in public. Then make a generous offer. I'd seen it from conference rooms with bottled water and skyline views. I hated it then. I loathed it when it came to my door. If you're listening and thinking, that's my story. 2. You ain't alone. Not in this valley. Not anywhere. Father Miguel says people stand taller when they stand together. Our Farmers Alliance kept meeting legal clinics on Saturdays. Shared equipment calendars. Bulk seed buys. A hotline for harassment. Ethel, the courthouse clerk, with a memory like a steel trap, became our patron saint of paper. If it ain't filed, it ain't real. she'd say, wagging a finger and handing over another scanned page from 1980-something. Word spread. Calls came from Oregon, Texas, Vermont. Same story. Different zip codes. Developers whispering sweet profits to boards that forgot the word neighbor. We shared templates, lists, playbooks. Knowledge travels. So does courage. One night, under cafe lights strung across my barn, Miguel said, "You know this ain't just about land. It's about power remembering its manners." He's right. It's about who gets to decide what a place is for and who gets to stay. Sun not yet over the ridge. Mist hugging rose like a soft blanket. Pruning shears in my hand. Coffee in the other. Sirens distant. Then louder. Bouncing off the hills. Crunch of boots on fallen leaves. Karen standing at the edge in her immaculate suit. Phone up like she was filming a victory parade. You could smell her perfume fighting the earthy morning. The officers were professional. Almost apologetic. "We got a call," one said. "Reports of unpermitted commercial activity." "On a farm," I said, gesturing at vines older than most marriages. Back then, I didn't know the man with the clipboard had a second ID in his wallet. I didn't know those sirens would become a soundtrack to someone else's downfall. All I knew was that I was done being polite to bullies. "Gentlemen," I told the cops, "you're welcome to look. Bring good shoes. It's a big place." Karen smirked like she'd already won. She hadn't. She just didn't know the game had changed. Back at mediation, after the handcuffs, the murmurs grew into something like wind in tall grass. Homeowners turned to each other with the face people make when they realize they've been sold a story with the ending ripped out. I laid out the rest, the fake contractor invoices washing money through the HOA. The emails pressing board members to get creative. The timeline of anonymous complaints that lined up too neatly with loan deadlines. Jake walked through the law in plain English. What was opinion? What was fact? And what was felony? Sarah unrolled maps, dotted with red, where the hillside would have slid if we hadn't stopped the grading. Miguel introduced families who'd been pushed to the edges by the march of beige. Ethel, bless her, held up a file and said, "If you can't find it in here, it ain't legal." Folks clapped, not the polite kind, the relief kind. Karen tried one last speech about outsiders meddling, but the room had changed. People who'd nodded at her for years now studied their shoes, or stared at me, or raised hands to ask the agents whether their deeds were safe. Power, it turns out, is allergic to daylight. These days, when sunset throws gold across the rows, I pour a tasting for the last tour of the evening and tell them the short version, the one where neighbors remembered how to be neighbors. I always say this part, 'cause it matters. The law ain't magic, but it can be a fence that keeps wolves out if you know where the posts go. If you've tangled with a board that forgot who pays the dues, or a developer who thinks your memories are in the way of his margins, hear me, you're not crazy. And you're not alone. Keep records. Find your people. Don't let anyone shame you out of your own ground. And, though, to the Karens of the world, sorry. Not sorry. Your title doesn't make you a queen. And your clipboard ain't a crown. Rules are for communities, not cudgels. So tell me, what would you do if your HOA tried to bulldoze your life for aesthetics? Anyone else had a board, pull stunts like this? Drop your story in the comments where you're watching from, what you're facing, what you learned. Someone out there needs to hear it. Because when good people stand together with facts, with law, with old-fashioned decency, the bullies lose. And that victory, it tastes like a good harvest after a long, hard year.